All right. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Welcome to our small acreage webinar today on small acreage swine production. My name is Jennifer Cook. I'm the small acreage management coordinator for the Front Range here in Colorado. And seated next to me is Brett Kaysen, who will do our presentation today. But before I hand the mic over to him, I'd like to go over a few things. First, our webinar is made possible by Colorado State University Extension and the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. And I'd like to put out a big thank you to our sponsor for today's webinar, Simpson Livestock, www.simpsonlivestock.com. Check out their website. If you're new to webinars, I'd like to direct your attention to the bottom left-hand corner of your screen where you can see a chat box. So this is a way we can communicate with each other during the presentation. I can not hear you, but you can hear me. So if you want to have any questions or comments, you can use the chat box and hit enter, and we'll be able to correspond in that way. Additionally, with us behind the scene is Ruth Wilson, who's with Colorado State Extension. And she's our IT specialist. If you have any IT questions, you can direct your comments to her. Hopefully you can at least use your chat box to ask her questions. Finally, I'd like to bring up a poll. I'd like to ask Ruth to bring up the poll for some before the presentation questions, just so we can kind of rate the success of our webinar and also get to know our audience a little bit better. We have a few questions. Oh, and it looks like the questions aren't right. So the first one is describing your experience about pigs, not alpacas and llamas, so sorry about that. And then the second one, please rate your knowledge of pigs, not alpacas and llamas. We must have had our poll from last presentation, so sorry about that. So you can use your mouse and click on the most appropriate answer, and we'll give you a few seconds to do that. While we're waiting for your responses, our format for today will be Brett will talk for about 45 or 50 minutes, and then we ask that you hold your questions and comments until the end of the presentation, and we'll have 5 or 10 minutes at the end to do a Q&A. So it looks like our experience with swine production is just considering is the biggest. And the knowledge of swine production is pretty much no knowledge or some knowledge, and a few of you are very knowledgeable. So great. Hopefully Brett will be able to address all your questions today, and if not, we have a small acreage livestock workshop on October 15th that hopefully you can join us for in Boulder County Fairgrounds in Longmont, and I'll tell you more about that at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'll hand the mic over to Brett, and we can get started.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Appreciate it greatly. A little bit about my background is that I'm an instructor in the Department of Animal Sciences, and I teach the swine production upper level course there. It's a 400 level course for our junior senior students. And the other role I guess I'd like to communicate to you today is that not only am I coming to you from an academic perspective, but ever since I was 8 years old, I have been in the swine business in some fashion. And that's been very, I guess, advantageous to me from a teaching perspective, because the value of the talk today I'm hoping will tie in some science and some basics from an academic perspective, but also give you a tie of a hands-on real world, I was feeding pigs at 4 a.m. this morning with a flashlight type of a background. As well, we have done that our whole life. My background lends to small acreage. Grew up on a small acreage swine farm, and then currently my wife and I and our 2 daughters run a small acreage swine production facility currently. So a topic that I'm very comfortable with, and appreciate that the poll question moved from alpacas to pigs, because for a moment I thought I had prepared inappropriately. So with that being said, we'll move forward. I will also tell you that there's a great deal of information in this talk, and so that being said, we'll try to get it done at an appropriate speed and pace. Some slides we'll spend more time on, and others we will just kind of go over briefly. Looking forward to your questions at the end. Do want to start with this slide. Even though you're focusing on small acreage environments and swine enterprises, I think it's very important that you understand from a industry perspective the different phases that we work with within commercial units. And we kind of break down this talk from a conception to a consumption perspective. but also wanted to give you a little real-world piece of the industry of what goes on in different phases within a same farm in real-world agriculture. And the 4 phases I'm going to talk to you about is breeding and gestation. So just as it says, when we inseminate that sow, whether it be with natural mating or artificial insemination, and then letting her gestate for 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days, or approximately 114 days. From that point in time, we move her into a farrowing system, where we're going to let her go through the parturition process, have those live pigs, and then take that to weaning. And weaning in this operation can be anywhere from 18 days to 6 weeks, depending on the operation you're working with, but an average of 28 days usually is a good weaning age. We move those pigs from the farrowing house then into what we call the nursery, and that's exactly what it is. As you think about a nursery for your young children, this is a nursery for young pigs, and we'll put them in there, from a 30-pound-ish to 70-pound area, and then finally we'll move them to a finishing barn where we'll take them from that 70-pound weight to a harvest weight or a market weight that's appropriate for the operation or your end goal in mind. That being said, then, if those are the stages of production, here is the types of operations that you can be involved in. And from a small acreage swine producer's perspective, when we think about the state of Colorado and we think about Simpson Livestock, who sponsored our event today, they've been very, very proactive, progressive, and profitable using a farrow to finish operation with a segment of Part 5 that we'll talk about. Farrow to finish is exactly that. You, as the manager of this swine operation, manage those pigs from the time that they're born to the time that they're going to finish at a harvest weight. And that takes a lot more input and a lot more time on the producer's perspective. Some people prefer to do a farrow to feeder pig production system. So you are going to farrow those pigs out. You're going to raise them up to a weight of roughly 70 pounds, and then you're going to sell those 70-pound feeder pigs to another operator to go into step 3 of feeder pig finishing. And then another phase would be phase 4, where we have farrow the sows, wean the pigs off the mothers, and then move them to a different operation as well. Final one, and one that a lot of small acreage people have been extremely successful with, and it takes a lot of inputs on the front side financially, but in the state of Colorado, we have a lot of small acreage producers that are in the purebred or seed stock operation business, and I should put / show pig business, where they'll take these sows from a farrow to finish operation with the end product being selling their genetics for different marketing opportunities. And so a lot of people, and some that I think looks like attendee list, that are involved in that part of the operation. Briefly, farrow to finish is just to touch upon what I talked about. I want to point out to you, you're involved in steps 1 through 4 on the previous slide, but you're taking those animals from the time they're born to the time that we take them to a harvest weight, and that's usually done on the same farm or same facility. Farrow to feeder pig production, I think we touched upon that quickly. Farrow those pigs out, take them to a 70-pound weight, and then move them on to another producer off farm. That producer then could be in a feeder pig finishing business. The other opportunity for a small acreage farmer would be buy feeder pigs from another operator, finish them on your place. I noticed some people in the poll said, we're interested in raising some pigs for meat. Here's a point where you could go to a producer, buy feeder pigs from them, and finish them on your own. So lots of opportunities there. Feeder to weaner. Again, the point of this slide is raise those pigs from birth to weaning. And I would like you to remember that an average weaning age is 28 days. At 28 days, you want to move those animals off your facility to another operation. Keep in mind, at weaning age of 28 days, when you're selling those pigs as a producer, they're still at a high risk in terms of immunity and some of those climatic changes that can happen to them. And so your facility needs to be up to par relative to a weaner to feeder pig or finish operation. I think we've touched pretty good on the purebred or seed stock operations. When we talk about this, their saleable product is mainly genetics in the form of breeding boars and gilts, but also the show pig scenario would tell us we're going to sell gilts and castrated boars or barras for show at county, state, and regional shows, and you can be very profitable doing that. So why would you do this? I mean, it's been fun to watch the various webinars that are archived, and you've done some on poultry and beef cattle, and so those of you folks that have seen all these webinars, maybe you're exploring something to do with your acreage that you've just currently purchased. What's the advantage of using swine? Well, other than they're the coolest species in the world, to me, you're dealing with a small initial investment. You can get into the pig business probably as little with as little cost as you prefer. The neat thing about pigs, as opposed to some of your larger ruminant animals, is quick turnover return. So from the time that animal's born to the time that we could harvest them in a plant, roughly 5 to 6 months. And also keep in mind, I threw out that gestation length term of 114 days for you, or some people prefer to use it as 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days. Those females gestate awfully quickly as opposed to some of the other species I think you've already talked about in this series. We can do this in a relatively small space. I know people that have 150 sows and they have them on 10 acres. And so that may sound like they're crowded. They actually aren't, and there's plenty of room, and we'll talk about that more in the end of the talk. I think you need to think about as a producer, not only can I gain from a financial perspective, but what are you going to learn along the way? And if you don't have much of a swine background, some of you said that, some of you said you have some basic knowledge, you will be amazed when you're around these animals every day. You will get training quickly, whether you like it or not, in selecting the correct animals. How do you feed these animals, and how do you manage them on a day-to-day basis? I'm telling you, in terms of facilities and housing and equipment for the beginner, you can get awfully creative with a low-cost budget. And so we're not talking about you have to have a heated barn. We're not talking about you have to have a totally enclosed building. Yes, those things are nice, but that being said, you can do it with an open-fronted shed and be pretty profitable. The other thing is, think about your expansion. And if you get into a profitable enterprise at the start with 2 sows or 4 sows and things are going well, maybe you can work up to 40 sows. I know some people in Colorado that had 40 sows on 2.5 acres. And a lot of people tell me, how did they get into the pig business in terms of the breeding of pigs and the production of pigs? Is usually they say it's a 4-H or FFA project gone crazy. They showed pigs as a youth. They're passionate about it. They graduate from the program, and then they move forward. So the Simpson folks that sponsored the webinar would be an example of that. And then maybe should be the number 1 bullet instead of number 7 is really figure out, what does this animal need? What does this animal need? And you'll read a lot of things of what they need. You'll hear a lot of things from different communities of what they need. You'll hear a lot of people define what they consider welfare. And I think the best way to determine what the pig needs from a welfare perspective is for you really manage them and you're hands-on with them every day. Talk about a few things. I hope you like my powerhouse pig here having their morning coffee. A little Starbucks on delivery. Some terms I want you to be familiar with: purebred. I think that's important, meaning an animal of pure blood that's registerable. Commercial pigs can be crossbreds. They can also be purebreds. The thing I want you to understand is between purebreds and commercial, from a marketing perspective, we tend to sell purebred pigs by the head and commercial hogs by the pound. And so that kind of determines quality and somewhat value. Crossbred is a mixture of 2 breeds, is the way I'd like you to think of it. I'm going to show you some breeds of swine. When you think white and you see a white pigmented pig, I want the word maternal to stick in your mind, or mother to stick in your mind, because the white breeds tend to be more maternal. When you see some of the darker pigmented breeds that we'll go over quickly, I want you to think about terminal traits. And when I think about terminal traits, think about they add extra muscle into their offspring and extra growth. Then we have these things called composite or synthetic breeds, probably not as appropriate for small acreage producers, but when we talk about some of our larger confinement swine operations, we've taken a hybrid of breeds, put them together to create these what we call synthetic breeds. So some breeds quickly. FYI, my favorite breed, the Yorkshire breed. I start with it not because it's my favorite, but it's the number 1 registered breed in the USA. Very maternal. I told you, when you see white, think maternal. And I'd hope that you folks watching could see that female on the right looks maternal to me. One thing you need to know as well, I think is kind of fun for you, FYI, is that when we put Shire after the breed term, that means erect ears. And so this breed has erect ears. Extremely maternal, good mothers, large litters. The next breed is a terminal breed, again, dark pigmented. It's the Duroc breed. Add extra muscle to a genetic code of a farm, extra growth. And they're very good in terms of their IMF, which means intramuscular fat. Some of you may know that as marbling. And their slogan for the breed is they'll grow on you. If you're looking for pigs that are extremely efficient on feed, fewer pounds of feed gain of inputs to pound of gain, they're exceptionally good. and they're also awfully good in terms of pork quality as well because of their extra marbling. Excuse me. The Hampshire breed, I like to call them Oreo pigs. I think that's kind of fun. They've got that belt, and that belt is what kind of makes them unique to some other breeds. Carcass merit breed, extra muscle, extra growth, and extremely lean from that perspective. To be registered as a purebred Hampshire, the belt can be of any width, can be narrow belted, could be wide belted, and they could be just black headed and the rest of their body is a belt. It just simply must need to be attached for you purebred enthusiasts. Landrace is again white, very maternal, super great mothers. They have these large, distinctive, floppy ears. They're very prolific, for those of you that don't know that term, meaning they have large litters, high survivability rate in those litters, and they milk extremely well to their young. You will notice relative to some of the pictures that we've seen, they're longer in their body length. Berkshires, lots of opportunity in the Berkshire breed. They're probably as good with intramuscular fat and pork quality of any of the breeds we've talked about this far. They're black in their bodies. They have 6 white points. Those being on 4 points on their legs, 1 on their nose, and then also on the tip of their tail if their tail has not been cropped. Now, I will tell you on Berkshires from a perspective of small acreage component, I think you need to look into this breed, and I'll tell you why. Innovative Meats, Innovative Foods, one of the local packers that we work with here in Colorado, they have a contract with Whole Foods, both in Fort Collins, or in Boulder and soon to be Fort Collins, and their goal is to produce purebred Berkshire pork and put it in their retail case. And the goal of that is to make a higher quality, more palatable product, and it works. Now the key is when you get into what we call some of these niche markets or branded products markets, those grocers like Whole Foods are going to hold you accountable relative to the way you raise these pigs. And so, that being said, they prefer the Berkshire breed because of their quality. We don't consume a lot of Berkshire pork in the United States, mainly because it's the higher end retail product that we produce as an industry in the United States, and a lot of that goes to export markets. So a lot of the Berkshire program goes to those Asian markets. They like the higher quality pork, and the key is they're willing to pay for it as well. Spots, easy breed to describe, I hope. Hopefully you can understand why we call them spots by the slide. True value is they're awfully early maturing and they grow extremely well. Chester Whites, again, they can get a little bit confused with Landraces. However, their ear carriage is smaller. When you think Chester White, think maternal, think good mothers and large litters. I do want to touch on the digestive system just for a moment. And the reason I lead with this slide is that if you're going to feed this animal, if you're going to manage this animal, you have to understand anatomically how it's made so that you understand the physiology behind it. A pig is a simple stomached animal, and it's called a monogastric. And for those of you that are novice to the pig world, the best analogy I can give you is that it has got a digestive system that is very similar to the human in terms of design. I've scanned in a picture here for you to just kind of see the anatomy on how it lays in this particular in a traditional pig. And because it has this true stomach, as opposed to a ruminant and a 4-compartment stomach like some of those you've talked about in the prior webinars, is we have to feed this beast quite a bit differently than a sheep, goat, dairy cow, or beef animal. Nutrition, we could spend 8 hours today just talking about swine nutrition, and I know there's some people, as I view on the attendee list, that are definitely more expert in swine nutrition than I am, but I think for our audience today, the things you need to understand about nutrition is it is the backbone of what we do in the swine industry. You can have great genetics that will excel everybody else in a certain breed or in a certain component. If you do not have the appropriate nutrition to get the total genetic exposure of that trait, then you're going to be shortchanging yourself. And some of those things that affect us from a production profitability perspective are quite simply genetics, environment, herd health, management, and nutrition. And these things work in harmony of each other if we do it right for you to make more money, because I assume that most of you want to get involved in this business to be profitable, or you should. But if we shortchange ourselves in nutrition, we're not going to be. Something in a take-home message I'd like you to note at home, if appropriate, is that feed represents 60 to 75% of the total cost of pork production. I'll read it to you again. Feed represents 60 to 75% of the total cost of pork production. So when I'm working with start-up farmers or people interested in getting in the pig business, and we work on a budget and we talk about a financial plan, this is the largest component of expense. And so keep that in mind as you move forward. You want to balance that expense. You want to make it realistic, but please don't shortchange yourself so much in that feed expense that you have also sacrificed your performance or profitability. So I think in terms of planning relative to nutrition program, it is crucial. You need to understand that each animal has different nutrient requirements. And the thing that I like to stress to folks is remember that when you're feeding your pigs at home, when you're getting into this operation, you want them to grow as fast as possible and efficiently as possible. That being said, if you will keep a regular schedule on how you feed those pigs, whether they be a gestating sow or lactating pig or even a market hog, it makes a difference. I mean, most of us, when we think about humans, I think we've all kind of got our routine. You know, we eat breakfast at a certain time. Some of you don't eat breakfast. You call that Starbucks. We have lunch, we have dinner, and we move forward. And so keep that routine somewhat the same. Give you some basic feedstuffs or foodstuffs for pigs: corn, soybean oil meal, vitamins, and minerals. It's not that basic, but that is kind of the fundamental of what we do. You can vary these feedstuffs in different amounts to get to that nutrient requirement you need, but you also need to get the right nutrients and feedstuffs in there and balance them accordingly. When you talk about a balanced nutrient profile, we talk about that in swine terms and livestock terms as a ration. So, touch upon ration for a moment. One of the struggles that I have in my position is I work with a lot of small acreage swine producers, and they have this idea that they want to balance their own rations, they want to mix their own feeds, and one of the beauties of giving this talk is I guess I can incorporate some of my philosophy, and my philosophy is I would not encourage you to do that. I understand that some of you are aspiring biochemists and nutritionists and want to explore some other opportunities, and that's fine, but you have to understand there's people that go to school for a long time that acquire a great deal of degrees and have a lot of letters behind their name that are experts in this field. Let those experts do these things for you. For instance, we work with a company here in Fort Collins by the name of Ranchway Feeds. We work with their leading nutritionist and their professional animal science staff to balance rations for the different production systems that we work with. I'm an animal scientist. I feel pretty comfortable about nutrition and also feeding hogs and knowing how to do that. I still don't mix my own rations. I allow the experts to do that, and at the end of the day, that will make you more profitable. They know the quantity of nutrients that is needed for one pig for one day, and they also know the mixture of feedstuffs that will supply the nutrients needed by the pig if that pig is healthy and eats in a normal day. Those are things that go into the components of what would be a balanced ration relative to performance. The 6 essential nutrients, I'm going to go over these briefly. In my swine production class I teach at Colorado State, we'll break each one of these down and we really dissect them. For the amount of time that we have, we won't do that here today. But I do expect you to know these 6 because there's going to be an essay exam at the end of this talk. You didn't know that. Jennifer didn't tell you, but hopefully you do well. Water. I do want you to keep that one in your brain. It seems so simple. I mean, we as people say you need so many ounces of water a day. But you would be amazed on the calls that I get to the university that says, my pig is not eating as much as it should. My pig is not performing like it should. My pig seems to be stressed. And the first thing I'll say is, well, what's the water like? Oh, well, it's got plenty of water. Good. Tell me more. Well, the water's been sitting in a 55-gallon drum through July, and it's heated up all day. And I don't know about you, but consumption from my perspective is I'm not excited about it. So personal philosophy is Dad always taught us growing up, as well as my grandfather, that listen, if it's not clean enough for you to drink, it's not good enough for your pigs. And I think that's a good general rule of thumb to go through it. Water, I'll keep it easy. Without it, they die. The picture I put in here for a purpose. You will see that we've got some nursery age pigs that are on a slatted confinement concrete floor. And what they're actually doing there is they're suckling off what we call a nipple water. And so that drop-down line is full of water, and that's how we are hydrating this particular pen of pigs. That is an option. 90% of their body weight as newborns is water. 70% of the body weight as adults is water. Pigs are interesting. They don't sweat. And so the old saying, sweats like a pig, I don't know where it came from, but it's inaccurate. And I would argue probably in this species it's as important as any to make sure we have the right temperature of water to help in thermoregulation and keep these animals from creating heat stress. Now, talk to that for a moment. In small acreage production, here's a place where people sometimes forget. They always remember, boy, cool water in the summer is important for my pigs, but inverse is true when you talk about wintertime. I know a lot of people that have cold water out of the tap that are watering their pigs at home, and understand in that thermoregulation process that animal actually has to warm, that water will decrease their body temperature. They have to warm their body temperature back up, and consequently they're expending energy. So cold water on a 30 below day in northern Colorado in January may not be your best option either. We use it to transport biomedical reactions in the body, and it dissolves some other nutrients. Water is important. Carbs, I won't spend a lot of time here. Know that starch is our #1 source of energy in swine diets, and I want you to know that corn, barley, oats, rice, sorghum, wheat are some of those sources. It is important to know how to read a feed tag. We'll talk briefly about that. And carbohydrates are usually not listed on a feed tag. Keeping in mind we need that nutritionist to help us. Fats, sources there are various oils, brewer's grains, distiller's grains, both of which are popular in Colorado. Fish meal is a good supplier of fats. You've got to be careful here, though, in terms of rancidity and shelf life. And then the big ones for the swine diets are soybeans and soy oil, for sure. Proteins, all protein is not the same. We're not supposed to have a biochemistry lesson today here, but if you don't take anything away from the protein slide, do take this away, in that we have this amino acid profile we need to feed these pigs. And the #1 most limiting amino acid for a profile in a pig is lysine. And you also see that as we've changed the genetics of these pigs, which we've changed them a great deal just in the last 4 years, the leaner, more muscular pigs actually have a higher lysine requirement than those with low lean growth rates. So genotype, and I would argue at some point phenotype, affects their overall requirement. Vitamins are important. A, D, E, and K are some of them that I'd like you to be familiar with. Some of those water solubles are C and B complex, B12 being a big one as well. Biotin, I'll point out that biotin has gone on more and more in some of these swine gestating rations and lactating rations. And we found that biotin in some of these rations helps with foot care and health, or toe care and health in some of these pigs, keeping their feet from cracking and keeping them sounder. Minerals, we could break those down into macro and micro minerals for you. I won't do that. Calcium, phos, some of those, copper, zinc, those are all important relative to balancing that ration as well. Now, they did want me to talk a little bit about health relative to this talk. That's a challenge because of just the broad spectrum of health issues and struggles we have in the industry. But I want to talk to you about health relative to medications that we put in swine rations to help alleviate some of those problems. Denagard is a component that we use a lot, broad spectrum antibiotic. It helps with weight gain, and it also really helps us in preventing dysentery, scours, diarrhea, those types of things in pigs, as well as pneumonia. I do want you to be aware that some of these have some withdrawal times. And withdrawal is important. We put that on feed labels. We talk about that for a reason. Food safety is one of our critical components in a swine production unit, no matter how big, how small. 7-day withdrawal time there. Tylen, widely used, and for a long time was probably our choice of sulfas for a great deal. Withdrawal time depends on the dose that you're going to use. Helps us, though, in things like atrophic rhinitis and also dysentery and pneumonia. The picture that I've shown there is a frontal view. I hope you can see the twisting of the snout in this particular animal. Atrophic rhinitis causes this, and that's one of the biggest health concerns we have in the swine industry. What I've found is that a lot of small producers don't know about atrophic rhinitis. They don't maybe have medication in their feed. And for a long time, especially in Colorado, I know people that quit vaccinating for it because they say, well, we never see it, and so we're not going to you can vaccinate for atrophic rhinitis, so we're not going to vaccinate for it. Well, lo and behold, we spent about 5 years not vaccinating for it, and what do you think happened? Obviously, we saw cases come back. So I would encourage you to not only use it from a Thailand perspective, from prevention, but I'd also vaccinate these pigs for atrophic rhinitis. And you can usually give that in a series of a 5-way or a 7-way vaccine that'll help you with lepto and eosyphilis and some of those others. Terramycin, I love to use terramycin when you talk about newly weaned pigs that you're taking from that lactating mom onto hard feeds. Excuse me, terramycin really works well to control any kind of scours that you may have. Not necessarily a medication at all, and so maybe more appropriate on a separate slide, but a beta agonist called Paline, otherwise known as ractopamine, and to be quite frank, it's a bipartitioning agent. You can use it to your advantage. It does have some pros and cons. Small acreage folks probably will not use this. It was designed for commercial operations to kind of increase your lean gain muscle. If you're interested in Paline, if you're interested in bipartitioning agents, I think it's appropriate to work with your nutritionist and your feed company. There are some advantages there in terms of efficiencies, and there are some cons to it as well. Just wanted to show you this slide. I like the dissection of this, is that we've actually taken those nasal passages and we've dissected them and cut out a slide for you. Shows the inflammation and degradation of the nasal tissue. The top slide would be one of normality. The bottom slide would be one that's kind of moderately in a problematic stage relative to atrophic rhinitis. So not only do you see that clinical sign outside is the twisting of the nose, this is physiologically what's going on inside, and you can see the degradation of that tissue there. So how to read a feed tag. I think that's important. It's amazing to me that people that are in the swine industry and have been in there for a long time actually struggle to do this. So I just put in a really quick basic feed tag for you to work through with me, and I'm going to ask you a few questions. So the first question I'm going to ask you, if you're following along, I told you there's going to be a test, is question number 1, what is the main ingredient in the feed? Well, I think it's similar to, not that I go to the grocery store, but I think it's similar to some of those grocery store items you buy, that the first product that's listed under ingredients makes up the maximum value of that. And so if you look under ingredients and then you come over here, you can see that there's actually a comment that's made that says grain products, okay? And so that being said, grain products, you can see it right above that pointer actually. What does that mean? Well, that can mean a lot of things, but grain products would be the maximum main ingredient in this feed, in which we expect prior to some of the knowledge I hopefully imparted on you. So what's the main active drug ingredient in this feed? Pretty logical, I think. It says active drug ingredient, tetracycline, basically, at 100 grams per ton. What is the minimum crude protein level? You will see on this feed tag as well that there's a guaranteed analysis column and then something that says crude protein. I think it's appropriate to point out that we're not going to guarantee you that, it's all 19% crude protein. What we're guaranteeing you is that the minimum requirement has been met of crude protein of 19% there under the guaranteed analysis. And those crude protein levels are important for us to know and read on a feed tag, because as animals are younger in their biological growth curve, especially pigs, we tend to want to have the protein higher. As they become older, we can reduce the protein. And in the costs of commodities today, crude protein also changes the value or the cost of that feed to you as a producer, so you need to think that through a little bit. I talked about withdrawal times earlier and their importance. So how many days prior to slaughter should this feed be removed? Well, we should come down here and read the feeding directions, and that's probably where we should start. Withdrawal 10 days prior to slaughter, contains high levels of copper, and don't feed it to sheep, because obviously sheep and copper don't mix. So be cognizant of those withdrawal times from a quality assurance perspective. I think it's very important. Crude fat levels, minimum crude fat here, you go back to your guaranteed analysis level and you see it's 5%. Now, you can read that. The question is that appropriate for the animal that we're feeding? Well, we're feeding an animal that we haven't talked about yet, but hopefully you can find it here on this feed label soon. Question is ground limestone included in the ingredients of this diet? I'll let you look through it quickly, and I think that you'll find soon that ground limestone is a component of what we do. The final one is, at what stage of growth should this ration be fed? Well, look at the top. pig grower medicated feed for pigs from 30 to 75 pounds. So those are just a few things that I'd like you to be cognizant of on a feed tag. Now understand every feed tag looks a little different. Every company does it a little bit different, but those are some kind of FYIs that I would encourage you to look at as producers as you're thinking about buying a particular ration or working with a particular feed company. I'll advance here quickly. Oh, there we go. So let's talk a little bit about space requirements and facilities. Boy, facilities are variable on these operations. I've seen facilities and animals housed in facilities that are nicer than most people's homes, which is amazing, and I truly mean that. And I've seen some facilities that, you know, you do it as low input as you can. And I think when you talk about facilities, instead of measuring, you know, how big your building is or how fancy or how small scale, let's talk about space first for performance. You know, let's make sure we've got enough space for the necessary feed, water, and living space for these growing and finishing pigs. And if we don't, and we overcrowd these animals, I guarantee you we're going to have poor performance. Okay? So the symptoms of overcrowding that you'll see if you've got them too tight is you'll have a reduction in gain. You will actually see these animals tend to bite each other's tails, and you'll see some various forms of cannibalism. And it's the analogy I give it is like this, is if you put me on an elevator with 30 of my closest friends and you leave me in there for 3 hours, I'm probably going to, you know, be cannibalistic too, because I want to get out. So think about that from a comfort factor relative to space requirements. Here's a demo of a self-feeder, and this comes in several different sizes, shapes, kinds. The neat thing about pigs is when you wean them from their mother, and you're taking them to those market weights, feed them as much as they can eat. Make sure that they have full feed at all times. People say that nomenclature says textbooks will teach you one space for 4 pigs. And so this particular picture I put in has actually 3 feeder doors at the bottom of it. And so one of those feeder doors would be appropriate for 4 pigs. Because understand, if they're on full feed all the time, they're not all going to be at the feeder at the same time. However, you'll see some of that in the cool in the morning, in the evening. You know, one thing that I like to do is sit down on the back deck and listen to the feeder lids bang. You know, it's fun to watch those pigs go do that, and I know I'm weird, but it's fun to watch their behavior patterns, and they will tend to eat as a group. Now, I caution you here, and working with a lot of 4-H and FFA kids, this happens a lot of times. They think, okay, this is cool. I'm going to pull the top off of this feeder. I'm going to put 1,000 pounds in it, 500 pounds, whatever. And that's a self-feeder, and then I can walk away. Okay, it's full, so the pigs will eat and life is good. What they forget is that potentially this pig is going to stick its head in the water, then it's going to stick its head in the dirt, it's going to make some mud, then it's going to stick its head back in the feeder and put that mud and some of that foreign debris in the feeder. As it does that, it clogs those self-feeders out, and so you open the feeder lid and you've got a really nice pile of mud, but you don't have much grain source. So I would argue, producers, just because it says self-feeder, please check those feeder lids. Please check for fines. Please check for foreign materials there and keep that clean. Okay, that's a big. Once I get that call that says my pigs aren't growing, that's one of the first places I go. Waters, again, come in various shapes and forms. The picture on your left you'll see is that nipple water I talked about in the nursery slide that those little pigs were suckling off of. Those come in different sizes. The smaller the nipple for the smaller pigs makes sense. The larger nipples for the larger pigs. And not only is size important, but also the backside of the screen, or the flow and the rate of water that will come out of those nipple waters, is important. This center slide is what I call a paddle waterer or a dish waterer. And the animal will physically push on that lever, and the water will drain into that trough, and they'll drink out of the trough. I've seen people use these paddle waters in like 55-gallon drums, whether they be plastic or whether they be steel. I think that's okay. Again, I caution you on the temperature of that water and make sure it's appropriate. I prefer something like the style that you see on the right for a low input producer. Here we're talking about a water that'll hold roughly 100 gallons of water. You physically fill that with your garden hose. You can see there's an opening space there for the pig to physically put their head in and drink. Now, if you have the money and you have the budget, unlike the Cason farm, where you have all automatic waters, where they're piped into hard core plumbing and they're heated. Life is great. You know, I saw Nancy Earlbeck's presentation she did for you on sheep and goats. She shows you her Ritchie water. I love those. I think they're excellent. Understand then you've got a little more cost involved on the front side, and then there's some maintenance that goes into that. Not that there's not maintenance with these others as well. The thing that I'd caution you on the water on the right, any of these waters really, or the automatic waters we're talking about that's hard plumbed. Another thing that I run into with producers, it's called an automatic water, Brett. That means it automatically waters my pigs. Yes, that's a great concept in theory, but understand it's a machine and machines break. And so one thing I find a lot of times is there could be a pig out of water for 3 to 5 days because no one physically looked and seen, is there water flowing from the particular mechanism that I choose. Cleanliness is important. That's an advantage to the nipple water, because you know you really can't get a lot of mud in that surface area there. The dish waters, the automatic waters, pigs will put a lot of soil, rocks, dirt, mud, unless you have them on concrete, and so that can somewhat challenge your float systems and cause problems. Pen design, man, that's a demographic of choice. It's highly variable. What I have found just between, I guess, my academic background and then my preference is, I think a pen should be narrow in width and long in length. Now, do you need to go out and start to get your T-posts and your hog panels and build it 8 foot by 24 foot because that's what Brick Hasten said? No. But I think the geometry or the basic that I gave you of that long, narrow pen is important. You need to know what pigs need for space. And you will find when you read and do your research, everybody has different ideas. What I'm giving you today is kind of a basic or a guideline that I use of various informations. Pigs to 40 pounds, you really need square feet, 3 square feet minimum. As you work towards 100 pounds, we're talking about 4 square feet, 150 pounds, 6 square feet, and 150 up to that market weight, about 8 square feet per pig. Okay, general guideline. Now, I'm giving you outside lots. And what I mean by this, and I think this would probably affect most of you that are watching online today, is that, you know, most of you, I envision you're going to have some kind of a building. It's probably going to be an open-faced building where they can get into the shade and stay out of those windy type conditions that we get here in Colorado, and then probably an outside lot past that. And so I try to break that down, if you're in that kind of environment, that a pig needs about 5 square feet under that roof per head, and then we're talking about 6 to 15 square feet per pig outside in those outside lots. It may seem like a lot to you. Really, it's not. I'm not going to say that you all need to go out and use your tape measures and make it perfect. I'm trying to give you a guideline. And the other thing I would tell you is that use common sense here. Observation's important. I enjoy, watching pigs. I mean, I just enjoy walking out, feeding them, observing them, analyzing, viewing them. And then if you look at them and you say, man, those pigs seem to be crowded, then you've probably got a problem. And the other thing is when you think about welfare, pen design, shape, and spacing, I tell my students the simple question. Look at the animals and then ask yourself the question, do they look comfortable? Does the animal look comfortable? And I think most of us, regardless of background, can say yes or no to that question and then work through that appropriateness. I just put a schematic here, same slide, just split it for you. Kind of an idea of an 8 by 24. I've got this area that's a bedding area that I want to be clean, draft-free, dry, so that they can stay warm and out of the wind and out of the rain, snow, whatever you're dealing with. You've got a feeding or an activity area with a general feeder there. And then I try to put a water in a separate corner away from that main feeding area, because one thing that is really special about pigs is they'll go to the restroom in the same spot. And we can, if we manage the bedding area, the placement of the feeder, and the placement of the water in that relative position, it makes it easier from a sanitation perspective. Just quickly here, talking about sows, boars, I'll go to the bottom line. Sows and breeding. What I mean by that is that if you have a set of sows in a pen and you turn a boar in there with them from a natural mating perspective, and let's say those sows average 325 pounds, I'm going to say they need about 16 square feet per head when you're talking about inside a cover. and also about 28 square feet per head outside. Again, general guidelines. You'll see a gestating sow by themselves and also a 400-pound boar in terms of those space requirements. Nursery pig spaces. If you're taking pigs from someone that does the feeder or the farrow to wean production system, you're going to buy them, put them in a nursery. Let's get 3 to 4 square feet per pig. Try to keep about 16 to 20 in a pen, not more than that. At the end of the day, I like to keep litters together because otherwise they're very social animals and they'll fight. If that's not possible, it's okay. It may be more important to sort them on size so that you don't have the big bully on the playground pushing everybody out of the feed. They did want me to touch upon breeding, and I'll do so here. Whether you're going to use natural mating, whether you use a boar, you turn the boar in with your gilts or sows to impregnate them, or you hand mate, where you physically help that boar impregnate those sows. Pen mating, we call that as well. Or, in my opinion, for small acreage folks, I think the power of artificial insemination is amazing and very important that you look into it, is that heat detection is key. Everybody wants to say, wow, the positioning of the rod and the system that we go through to impregnate these sows, that's the important part. Let me tell you, and this is the truth, beef cattle are a little harder to impregnate via AI, sheep as well. My 3.5-year-old daughter knows how to breed sows. I mean, is it because she's a super child? No, it's very basic. Now, the key component, though, she's not good at, and that where most people go wrong and end up with open sows, is heat detection. Okay, and what we're trying to find is that female in estrus. Okay, and so you've got to really observe and understand the behavioral changes of these animals to figure that out. Here's some things to look for in terms of identifying heat. These sows and gilts tend to get more active, certainly more vocal. We see that on our place. My wife says they get grumpy. That could be case. You'll see the swelling of the vulva, sticky discharge from the vulva. Their ear carriage is more erect. Now on those down-ear pigs, kind of like your Durocs, obviously their ears are not going to stand up on end. I'm not trying to portray that to you, but they will become a little bit more upright, and they kind of create a popping fluctuation with their ears. And the big one is that put some back pressure on these pigs, physically push down on their top, and see what they do. If you push on their loin and on their top just gently, and they stop and stand and lock up, you're probably talking about a good heat. And that's when we know that they're sexually receptive, would be to a boar, if you're using a boar, or an opportunity to mate them in terms of AI. A couple pictures I put in here for you. The one on the left, the gentleman here is just applying a pressure on the rump and then also some pressure on the loin, trying to figure out, will this gilt stand or is she going to run off? The same picture to the right, he's applying some pressure in the middle of her back, and he's looking to see if she will lock up and stand or if she'll walk away. People get confused with estrus and heat and ovulation. A lot of people I work with, as soon as that sow, they've determined she's in heat, she's standing, they want to breed her. And if you're in a natural mating situation and you're going to turn the boar in, that's okay. If you're artificially inseminating these females, that's not okay. Okay? So the interval between the start of heat and ovulation, or when the eggs are produced, averages about 35 to 45 hours. And the duration of this ovulation, data shows from 1 to 7 hours. So we're talking a relatively small window here. And we could talk about sperm viability all day long, but insemination should occur roughly a minimum of 8 hours prior to when these females ovulate so we can actually impregnate them. So let me give you some guidelines. We've decided that this gilt is in standing heat. The sow is in standing heat, either or. She's locked up when we applied back pressure. Sows, then at that point in time, once we've recorded that she's in heat, and we usually heat check in the morning and at night. By the way, the best way to do that's with a boar, fence line contact, nose to nose. So if you're a small producer, I still encourage you to have a boar. Some people say boars are destructive, and they are. One of my former students, I think one that may be with us today online, I give her total credit. She had the idea of buying a little boar that was kind of a miniature pig, if you will, okay, or a pot-bellied pig. And she uses that as her heat detecting boar, and it works fantastic. So easier on your facility and lower from a feed cost perspective. Let's say the sow's in heat. We've determined this morning when we did chores at 6 a.m. she was in standing lordosis. We should not breed her right now. We've determined she's in heat. Let's wait 24 hours waiting for her to ovulate, and let's breed her tomorrow morning. Then, because of this ovulation thing and the window of 1 hour to 7 hours, we're not quite sure when she's going to ovulate. When we AI pigs, we do it with 2 doses of semen. So we're going to hit her 24 hours after the first onset of standing heat, and we're going to breed her at 24, and then we're going to wait 12 more and breed her at 36. At that point in time, we feel very safe that we've probably got in that ovulation rate. Gilts are a little different. Gilts, I would argue, should be bred 12 hours after you've determined that that female is in standing heat, and then again 12 hours later, or 24 hours after the initial heat. I tell you that the textbooks will read differently here. Some textbooks will read the same when you go looking for information. This is a combination of what I've read, what I've studied, but also real-world practicality of what works for us. When we've measured conception rates over time, we have the highest success rate on our operation using this procedure. I'll be quick because we're running short on time. Wanted to show a demographic really quick here of your AI procedure. You're going to clean the vulva prior to insemination. You're going to insert the breeding rod. Keep in mind you want to do that at a 45-degree angle. And you're going to push that rod in there as far as you can until you start to get some resistance, and then you know you've reached the cervix. Depending on the rod you use, if it's a spirette, you'll turn that counterclockwise to actually get into the cervix. I prefer a foam tip catheter or rod. When I get to the cervix and I feel that resistance, I stop and I attach the semen bottle to the rod and start to impregnate that female. Now, the thing I guess, digress here just for a moment. You want to see, and be patient here, most people want to get that semen on the rod and push that semen in as fast as they can. If you have caught this female in standing heat and you've inserted your rod properly, a lot of times they will actually draw the semen. The female herself with uterine contraction will draw the semen out of the bottle and actually bring it into her body. And if you're not getting that, a lot of times if you'll back your rod back towards you and just kind of wiggle a little bit, you'll see that semen fall from the bottle into the rod and into the female. So be patient. Don't push and squeeze and run it through there as quick as you can, because a lot of times you'll get backflow. Let her actually draw the product. They did want me to touch a little bit on pork products. Very basic. Here's your Wholesale Cuts, your Boston butt, your picnic shoulder, loin, belly, as well as the ham. Some of you on the poll said you want to raise pigs for meat. I think this slide is of importance to you. And as we archive this talk, you can go back to this slide as well. So people always say, well, if I take a pig to harvest, what am I going to get? And so let's talk about Wholesale Cuts. If we talk about a 250-pound pig that's average in muscle composition, average in leanness, you're going to talk about getting roughly 15 to 20 pounds of total ham, 10 to 14 total pounds of loin, 15 to 20 pounds of total belly, which turns into bacon. And my wife continues to tell me, can you create a pig that has more belly? Because that's her favorite cut. Haven't figured that out yet. The Boston butt would be 5 to 7 pounds, and a picnic shoulder 6 to 8, relatively speaking. We break those Wholesale Cuts down to retail. And so now we're trying to think about, okay, I took the pig in. What am I going to get back when I load it in the vehicle and I go home? Roughly 2 hams that are 15 to 20 pounds in weight, depending on size, thickness of pork chop. I know this is variable, 60 to 70 pork chops off that carcass, 50 to 20 pounds of pork steaks, 2 6 to 7 pound roasts, and roughly 15 to 20 pounds of bacon, spare ribs, or pork hocks, and some of my favorite 15 to 20 pounds of sausage. And so these are relative terms, but for you that are interested in some niche marketing and selling some pork or raising some pork at home, think about a live pig at 250. Here's kind of what you can expect in return, because we usually get 73% of the live weight in carcass weight, and then we break those down. I do want to point this out, and I think it's very, very important, is that pick a meat processor that does a nice job. You have several options in Colorado. I've got to speak from northern Colorado specifically because we work with a lot of different ones. You're going to take your pig to the harvest plant, call ahead. For instance, if you've got pigs that are ready in July, August, September, and you just call the day before you want to bring it, you're probably not going to get in because that's county fair peak season in Colorado, and they're harvesting a lot of those pigs from those various events. So make sure that you pre-plan what you're going to do there. I know this is a big gap, harvest fee of $15 to $60. I know that's a big gap. The survey of the people I polled, that's what they charge you. So they're going to charge you as the producer when you bring that pig in either $15 or $60 just to take that animal's life from a harvest fee perspective. Processing fees, depending on what you get, depending on how fancy a seasoning of sausage you want, how long you're going to smoke the bacon. Usually you're going to pay 40 to 70 cents per pound for every pound that you put in your vehicle as you drive away from the plant. I know a lot of people that are passionate about selling pork. They want to go to farmers markets and sell pork. They want to sell pork to their neighbors, and I think that's great. From my perspective, there's nothing better than pork that's raised at home, that you know how it's been handled, and that's what we do. We don't buy pork in the grocery store because we always have it on hand, but we do sell pork as well as part of our business at home. When you do that, you need to make sure you're working with a USDA inspected harvest plant. It's inspected for health, it's inspected for a lot of things. This product will actually have a USDA stamp on it, and then you can sell that as retail product. If it doesn't go through a USDA inspected plant, they will label that product as not for sale coming out of the plant, and legally you're not to sell that product. I know in past webinars they have mentioned that most people want a set of resources. Here's some that I use every day. This will be archived. Here's some web links for you that you can find information about all the things we talked about, plus much, much more on various sizes and scales. And so I hope some of these resources will help you as well. So 56 minutes of a talk, and did the best I could to give you quite a bit of information, and I guess we'll entertain questions now if anybody has any.
Okay, thanks, Brett. So as Brett said, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Small Acreage Management website. So you can refer back for these resources, and if you want to look back at the presentation again. While we have this up, why don't we bring up the poll questions, and we'll take a few minutes, and then we'll go back to that slide if you still wanted to write a few things down. So please rate your knowledge. Oh, we got the alpacas and llamas up again. We'll switch it to pigs. Your knowledge about raising pigs after the presentation now. Hopefully you know a little bit more. What would you still like to learn more about? And do you plan on using the skills presented within the next year? So this information just helps us figure out how well we're doing with these webinars and with these presentations in general. So we'll give you a few minutes to finish up. Like everyone's probably in. Still want to know more about feed and nutrition.
Absolutely. I would expect that. I would expect that. That's important.
Probably feed your pigs better than you feed yourself.
Yes, that is a fact. That's totally a fact.
Okay. Let's see. Yeah, we'll bring up the chat box. Can you also put up the not sure if anyone needs the resources again, but you can go back to the webinar recording if you want to look at the resources again. And why don't we pull up the information on the livestock workshop real quick? So just if anyone's interested in learning more, we're going to have a livestock workshop on October 15th at the Boulder County Fairgrounds. If you go to that website listed at the bottom, there'll be more information and registration and all that. It's a full day workshop. We'll have live animals on site and knowledgeable presenters, so hopefully you can join us for that. All right, so we're open for questions. If anyone wants to use the chat box, we have a few more minutes, and we're, although it's almost 1 o'clock, we're willing to stick around for a few more minutes if you want to stick around for questions.
I would comment too from your poll discussion. I think that's great. And Pat, you chime in here right away with what are the protein requirements at various sizes. And thank you. I thought about for a moment of putting that into the presentation, and I should have. Some basic guidelines for you, Pat, and those that are still with us is that when you're talking about those pigs that are still with the sows, they're still nursing their mothers. I like to put a creep ration involved there at about a 21% protein. And once we wean those pigs from the mothers, then I put them on what I call a starter ration that should be at least 18 8% protein. We move there after about, I like to go to 70 to 100 pounds with that 18% protein. Then I move him into what I call a grower, Pat, at a 16% protein. And the final finishing phase, I usually call that the last 30 to 40 days prior to harvest. I go on a finishing diet of 14% crude protein. So we start with 21, we transition to 18, then to 16, then to 14 for those various sizes. So you'll find a lot of that information online. It's an excellent question. And again, I can't emphasize enough of why one should work with that nutritionist. And I can't say enough about, I guess, in this area, and I don't know where you're all located, but for those of you that are in northern Colorado, Ranchway Feeds and Dr. Kelsey Swires and her crew do an awesome job. So maintenance requirement, protein for unbred sows and gilts prior to breeding. Alexis asked that question. Alexis, great question. Maintenance for unbred sows and gilts prior to breeding. I would never breed a gilt until she weighs 310 pounds live weight. So I would leave a gilt on full feed until she's 310 pounds. At that point in time then, Alexis, I would balance her in terms of her feed intake anywhere from 3 pounds per head per day to 6 pounds per head per day. Same thing for unbred sows. I would say maintenance protein of 14%, total pounds fed 3 to 6 pounds per head per day. So our gestation lactation rations run in that 14% crude protein level. And, you know, like right now we're feeding our bred sows and gilts 6 pounds per head when they're open. If we can get by with 3, we will. We're in an outside environment, so, you know, in July, sometimes we feed 14% crude protein, 3 pounds per head per day. When we get into January and they're using a lot of energy to stay warm, we bump it up to 6. So I hope that helps you from that perspective. So. And Alexis says, yes, thanks.
All right, we'll hang out for a little bit longer to see if anyone else has some questions. And I'll be sending out the link to the recording and also the link to the livestock workshop registration page coming up in October for all of you.
I would like to thank you folks for the invite. It was fun. I really enjoyed it, so I didn't do that up front. But looks like we have Pat's got a question. At what age is a boar ready to breed? Excellent question, Pat. And it's variable. It's variable depending on breed. But the thing that you want to think about is that usually puberty is reached and they can sexually be active and impregnate sows at about 6 months of age. And so a lot of people say, oh, he's 6 months of age, he's ready to breed, I'm going to put him in with my sows. And that's fine. Physiologically, he's ready. The thing you've got to be careful of, Pat, is that I've seen people take those 6-month-old boars and throw them in with their 400 and 500-pound sows. And to be quite frank, those sows are pretty aggressive and they beat on that boar pretty bad. And so what he learns real quick is what he's supposed to do, but he's getting beat up on by these larger sows, or boss sows as we call them. And so physiologically he can breed, but temperament and disposition, he's like, I never want to do that again. And reasonably so. So to answer your question, it's 6 months, relatively speaking. But also, Pat, I encourage you to make sure that he's the right size physically to be able to mount and actually insert into those sows. But also watch him from a behavioral perspective. I don't want him to get beat up on, and I don't want him to become lame. So I hope that helps. Victoria asks, parasites specific to pigs, are there some that can cross to other livestock species? Yes, there are some that are specific to pigs. There are some that can cross to other livestock species. Victoria, I guess the best thing I can tell you is that something we should have probably talked about as well. You think about this, there's all kinds of things we could have said, but you need to use a wormer biannually on your pigs. And I prefer an injectable wormer, that being of ivermectin or Dectomax. There are some wormers you can put in their feed or their water. They're harder to regulate. And so if you will biannually vaccinate those sows, gilts, boars, pigs for internal, external parasites, you will eliminate in the pig species and then eliminate that cross-contamination. If you have an operation where I've been to, a lot of people have pigs, goats, sheep, cattle, I've not seen a lot of cross-contamination relative to parasites. So I hope that helps you, Victoria. So let's see if we have... Pat comes in with, all my pigs are together. I was going to breed this year and decided not to. I have an intact male who's not going to market. Should I separate him from the gilts? Yeah, great question. Pat asks, right now she's got all of her pigs together. She decided not to breed, and she does have an intact male who sounds like is going to go on to harvest, and she wants to know, should I separate him from the gilts? Pat, I would. I would always try to keep those boars separate from the females. When they're young and you're just weaning them, that's one thing if they're not castrated. But as they get to that 100-pound mark, I always try to keep those males, intact males, separate from the rest of your community if you have the opportunity to do that. So please do. Hopefully that helps answer your question, Pat.
And the comment from Ranchway Feed, I'll take that into consideration. Thanks for that.
Yeah, excellent. They come in with, talking about a presentation to talk about problems that I may encounter and how you address them. Scenario type theme. I think that's a great opportunity for Jennifer and her crew to think about. So.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Brett. Do we have another question? Maybe someone else is typing. So
I think we have Victoria and Pat maybe, and so it's up to you. But
okay, we'll hang on for a little bit longer. But while we're waiting, thank you so much for all your information and knowledge, and hopefully maybe you can join us again for
it'd be fun. This is the first time I've done webinars, so it was a new experience for me, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Good.
So. Says Pat comes in, I think, with next year I'm going to breed Berkshires. Can I run the boar with the gilts or separate them? If you're going to do the Berkshire thing, you can run the boar with gilts. Again, I would separate them. I would keep them separated if you can help that. And I just think from a management perspective, it makes a lot more sense for you. I do know of some people that run their boars in with gilts all the time and their sows all the time. And the problem becomes is they start to impregnate those gilts and sows, and people aren't quite sure when conception took place. So from a management perspective, now you don't know when the farrowing date's going to be. So that's a little bit of a challenge. So another question coming in, what about raising pigs on pasture? Love it. A little different operating scheme there. All of our pigs that we raise at home are on a pasture environment. But they're also in confinement pens on pasture with shelter. So there's a lot of people in the Midwest that still raise pigs on pasture, and I'm okay with that. The things you have to be careful of is, management from a commingling perspective. Make sure you keep age groups separate. And then some people put them out on pasture or alfalfa fields and think that, we can meet their nutritive requirement. And we've got to be careful when we raise pigs on pasture that we're supplement feeding, obviously. But free-range pork, pasture pork, is becoming very popular. For instance, Chipotle restaurant here in town, that's one of their components of buying pork. Linda comes in and asks, what's the gestation length? Linda, it's kind of fun in pigs. 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days. 3 minutes, 3 seconds. No, just kidding, Linda. 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days. And if you think, Linda, just roughly 114 days would be gestation length. So hopefully that helps.
All right. So looks like everyone's finished typing. So thanks for all your questions and for tuning into our webinar today. And hopefully you can join us for our workshop in October on the 15th. And thank you also, Brett, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And everyone have a great afternoon.